Good evening, and thanks for coming out tonight while we're talking about PTSD and the thin blue line. If you've been paying attention to the news, it's really depressing. The country's in turmoil, and it just doesn't seem to get better. It seems like every time we turn on the TV, there's another incident where an officer's been involved in a shooting or a city's in flame, and it's just one of these issues that just we're praying for it to stop, but it just we need calm heads to come together and start talking about it. In 2019, 228 police officers died of suicide, compared to the number of 172 in 2018. Current statistics by the National Institute of Mental Health suggest that nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults live in some form of mental illness. Now, currently, suicide is the second leading cause of death among 10 to 34-year-olds. On Tuesday, July the 14th, 2020, Buck Institute interviewed Dr. Robert Redfield from the CDC and said that there was another high cost for the coronavirus. And that was that we were seeing far greater suicides in juveniles than we had ever seen before. And that we were seeing more deaths of drug overdose because of people being secluded or kind of shelter in place with the COVID-19 virus. So when we started talking about putting together our conference this year, one of the things that I was really looking at trying to do was to talk a little bit about mental illness and maybe being that there's somebody out here that could help us with this type of thing. Maybe somebody could come in and shed some light. And of course, I always like to have a Christian point of view to it. So I was talking with a good friend of mine who's on our board also. And we got to talk, and Greg Heckroth, and who is with Florida Surgical Specialist. And he told me about Cameron Allen. Now, when he started to describe Cameron, I think my eyes glazed over because he was talking about things that I just was like amazed at, that we could actually do these things. And one of the things he talked about was about mapping the brain. And I just found it fascinating because he's able to help people when he gets in and starts to look at, and it's way above me, and I'm not even going to try. So we reached out to Cameron to see if he would come and speak at our conference, and he said he would. So I was really happy about that. Now, I had an opportunity to do a Zoom call with Cameron, and we started talking, and Cameron started reading me like a book because he was talking about traumatic injuries or things that have happened in people's life that have a lasting effect on them and how they cope with it or handle it. But yet they have ways of helping them in what they call their neuroscience. He's a neuroscience specialist. But I just kept listening to him, and I was totally amazed. And then he stopped halfway through the talk and talked about Jesus Christ. So now when I hear science and Jesus Christ coming together, I am really excited. So I asked him if he'd come out tonight and talk about some of these things about where we're seeing the PTSD in everybody. Everybody has an experience in their life where it stops them. It stops them in their track, and somehow they have to overcome that. So I'm going to bring Cameron on. We're going to get to talking. I want to hear a little bit about him. I want to introduce you to him and let him kind of tell you a little bit about himself. All right, Cameron, there we are.
Hey there.
All right, Cameron, you're in Asheville, North Carolina, one of my most favorite places in the whole wide world.
Damn, it's beautiful up here.
I saw that you were with the SUWS of the Carolinas. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because they have wilderness therapy, and I've decided I want to come up and do wilderness therapy. I'm telling you.
Yeah, so SUWS of the Carolinas is one of the facilities that I contract with that I've been working alongside for about almost 10 years. May will be 10 years. And I came in to provide neuropsychological education. And what's really fascinating to me is that, you know, when we're working with young people or we're working with anybody who's experienced trauma, the last thing that they really want or can handle is just education. You don't want to be talking at them. them. You don't want to be teaching them something that they have experienced. And so what I quickly realized is that this needed to be as experiential as possible. They needed to feel it. They needed to understand it. And so what I've been specializing in as a researcher years ago, really working in addiction studies and working in depression populations and anxiety, I really got into neuroimaging. And so what I found was that the neuroimaging, using acute EEG primarily, measuring the electrical distribution in the brain, being able to see what areas of the brain are overactive and underactive, being able to then correlate what exactly the brain is asking for by these dysregulated areas in the brain. So I'll get into that a little bit here in just a minute. But basically being able to take an individual's brain scan and say, hey, here's why you're pursuing these particular behaviors. This is where some of the risk-taking behaviors are coming from. Here is a trauma response in your brain, and the oxytocin network, the network that's involved in being able to relate to others and be in relationship with others and to feel authentic connection, is completely dysregulated. It's riddled with fear. And so instead, we're going to more dopamine seeking. We're looking for substances. We're looking for using sex, we're using gambling, we're using all of these other external internal state and get rid of some of that fear. And so I've been working with adolescents and individuals from 11 all the way up to 18 there at SUSE of the Carolinas, working with them, showing them what's going on in their brain, what their brain is asking for, and helping them to define their values, what's important to them, and without having to just try to escape from their internal suffering and without going into avoidance. How do we shift from avoiding our pain and fear and sadness and loneliness, isolation, and moving towards something that's meaningful and valuable? And so that's really at the crux of what I do, and I use neuroscience to do that. But you know, neuroscience is in many ways the modern mythology. It's a way that we can conceptualize our world and conceptualize what's happening. We don't know in our brain. It's very complex, but to give narrative, to give a framework to understand ourselves through is incredibly effective. And it turns out that it parallels a lot of these teachings pretty nicely. And we can talk a little bit more about that here in just a little bit. But primarily the work I've been doing is in neuroimaging, research, and helping individuals really understand what their brain is asking for.
Now, how did you fall into this? I mean, how did you get, I mean, what started this, you know, I can look at a person's, because what you're talking about is that if we can find another alternative, and I'm using layman's term, and I'm, like I said, I am a layman in this. I'm just listening to you. But if we can use another alternative instead of drugs or alcohol or sex or the different things like that to really kind of escape it more than anything else, the traumas that we've been through, you're able to see this. I mean, you're literally able to see it by going in and doing the mapping. And that just amazes me that, how did you find this out? I mean, how did you get started in this? What was it that got you here where you're at now?
Anything we're passionate about in life, I feel like something close to home happens that drives us into it. And for me, that was my oldest brother I experienced a number of head injuries through car accidents, skateboard accidents, lost consciousness a number of times, and developed this chemical imbalance in his brain. And my folks had tried just about everything. And he ended up going into self-medicating, overusing his medications that he was prescribed, as well as using recreational drugs to try to just manage, and then eventually had this suicide attempt that landed him in the hospital for 3 weeks, the psych ward. And after coming out of that, tried to shift medications, tried absolutely everything you could imagine, and nothing worked. And eventually somebody said, hey, there's this thing called neurofeedback, and there's a guy that's out in Arizona doing this. And and you might want to check it out. And so at the time, I was actually, I had learning disabilities, failing out of school, and I was not heading in the direction of neuroscience whatsoever. And so my folks said, hey, this guy works with learning disabilities and social anxiety and all this other stuff that you've got going on. Why don't you go out there? And so my brother and I go out to this program. And so during that, we were doing a lot of brain-based interventions, neurofeedback, biofeedback, this wonderful acoustic vagal nerve stimulating protocol that actually helps to calm down the central nervous system and kind of reconnect the brain and body connection so that you can kind of engage more fully. And after about 3 months of being in that and going through it, you know, 3 to 4 times a week, all of a sudden the lights came on for my brother. And for the first time in probably 6 years, he looked at me one day and told me he loved me and gave me a hug. And I just started bawling. And even to this day, I get goosebumps and still a little bit of emotional for me. And for myself, I ended up, all of a sudden the lights came on for me a short while later, where life got easy. School was easy. I ended up going back to school and shifted into this other program. Graduated in the last 2 years of, I finished my last 2 years of high school in 1 semester essentially, and got straight A's in everything, and went on to college, and everything just got easier for me. And I was actually heading in the direction of aeronautical engineering after that. And then started looking at biomedical engineering and started working in that direction. And then I had access to a bunch of neuroimaging equipment while I was in school. And so it eventually transitioned over into psychology and neuropsychology. And kind of the rest is kind of history. As I was in that, I was approached to be a part of a number of research projects, ended up right after graduating, working with a orthomolecular pathologist and a geneticist to start evaluating interventions for individuals with substance abuse. And then after that, God just laid the path the whole way through, where I couldn't have planned out the career. I couldn't have planned out how it happened. But I knew I was meant to help people, and I knew that I needed to serve people and give back what I'd been given. And so that's kind of the direction. And it turns out I'm just really good at the whole neuroscience thing. And it's a skill that was given to me, and I'm going to use it for God's glory, you know.
So you mentioned God. When did God come into your life?
Well, I grew up as in the Presbyterian church, in a PCA church, and all the way through, I was raised by 2 very strong Christians, and loved to talk about theology and loved to talk about kind of the finer points of the Bible and the finer points of philosophy behind religion and all of that. And then in college, I kind of started questioning, moving away a little bit. And really, as I was really getting embedded and learning more and more about neuroscience, I thought, man, everything could be explained by neuroscience, everything, our whole experience. I mean, religion, you know, there's something missing there. It can just be explained. And so then as I got older and less arrogant and realized that the world was far more complex than I can wrap my head around, then recognized and really came back to those roots, and that the verse of raise your children up in the ways of God so that when they're older they know the path, essentially. That's all true for me, and so very much got called back to my walk with God. And I really appreciate that time of questioning and moving away to really see the limitations of my control and my own intellect, and recognizing how much to just go back into being grateful to God and trusting in the path is control of our lives. But when it really comes down to it, it's a cognitive distortion that we want to believe so that we have power, that really is just to mask a lot of fear and concern that we have that we might not be good enough and all of that. Right. So really, I've had that thread throughout my entire life, but definitely 1 minute there, and then definitely was able to come back and be reaffirmed by Christ's path.
Did it cause you some trouble in the field that you're in, the Christian point of view?
You know, it does. It's interesting because, you know, in my field, Buddhism is far more accepted than Christianity. and, and so it's really fun to, when I start talking with folks that are in my field, that everybody, I mean, unanimously, I would say that everybody that I ever talk with about this will say that there is a spiritual aspect to healing. And so there is that piece of it. But when it comes down to saying, like, you know, well, my path is the Christian path, and that I very much follow the example of life, that, you know, live according to God's law, and to love one another and love your neighbor. And these three remain: faith, hope, and love. And that means accountability. That means, you know, community, supporting one another. And that aspect of it has really been to engage in more of a secular perspective of spirituality and religion, and which is more of just being curious, just trusting that there's something greater than yourself, which is a fantastic place to start. And if say that that's not where they should be, or that they should progress through that, and in this industry, as soon as the term Christianity is applied, immediately there's this dogma. Really, I'm meant to live as close to Christ-like life as I can as a sinner, and if somebody sees Christ in that, fantastic. It's not my job to prove something to them. And it's really interesting when the discussion heads in that direction. They're like, oh, okay, you're fine. You're not a threat.
Yeah.
and it's interesting how much that really encourages the conversation and opens people to come in, and how many people have ultimately wanted to come and have deeper conversations about that. And where does that piece come from? What does that mean? And so, so it's a really interesting piece, that it can be really inflammatory, or it can be really intriguing to a lot of these folks.
So to kind of follow up on it, and just want to let you know, you broke up a couple of times there, but I think everybody's got the gist of where we're going with this. When a person starts to come around from the treatment that y'all are using, mm-hmm. and starts to feel better, mm-hmm. there's probably during that time frame that question, what is the great, there's got to be something more than this right here. I mean, mm-hmm. that's where I saw it. You know, there had to be something more than what I was living right here. Mm-hmm. And when you apply those two, I think you really truly have the best of both worlds, because what you're talking about doing in all this, you're trying to get people, and correct me, I'm not saying anything bad about using drugs of some sort to help people. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm for sure that's a part of the process, mm-hmm. but it would be better if we could get it to where they didn't have to have anything at all. And I don't know whether or not the science that you're doing right now can get it to that point. Is it a possibility, mm-hmm. or is that still too far in advance for us to know?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think I've always kind of had that discussion with the professionals that I work with, the psychiatrists and neurologists, and it's really interesting because their goal for the majority of the people that I work with is not to have somebody on medication for a long period of time. Okay. It's to get through the acute period of when something is really dysregulated and we need something to kind of stabilize somebody to keep them safe, or if there's a genetic underpinning that really genuinely does need this chemical assistant, great, you know, that's helpful. But when we look at some of the shifting over into using some of the brain-based modalities and interventions, that we've got this multi-layer thing happening where we've got the physiology of the brain, that needs to be regulated. And we can do that through a lot of different techniques, whether it's transcranial magnetic stimulation, even hyperbaric oxygen to get somebody out of an acute stress or head injury, or even as a result of some of the neurological effects of corona. I've been working with a number of folks that were using it for that. And then we've got, the biofeedback and neurofeedback to help practice self-regulation, to give more of a sense of self-efficacy. And so in that, we're regulating the physiology of the brain, the actual structure of the brain. And then we have to work with the psychological aspect of helping them understand how to work with the hardware. It's kind of like getting a new computer, and you get this brand new iPad, this fancy Mac, and you got to sit there and tinker with it for hours until you get used to it. The same is true once we rewire our brain, that we have to get used to it. We've got to be able to have a sounding board. And so when we can do that, that's really, it's really helpful. But when individuals have been in such a trauma, and all of a sudden we re-regulate the brain, we bring them back into balance, then all of a sudden that relaxation actually feels really uncomfortable, because we're no longer in control. We're no longer living in that anxiety state that gives us a sense of power. When we're experiencing a lot of anxiety and trying to control things, we're releasing a ton of norepinephrine, which is the methamphetamine of our brain that gives us a sense of power and control. As soon as we let that go and we go into the other circuitry in our brain, the oxytocin, where we're bonding and connecting and in a relaxed state, then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, this feels way too vulnerable. And so that's where certain people use medication in that taper down, or it's really about rallying around in community to kind of bolster. But what a lot of folks do, going back to the medication piece, is that a lot of folks stay on the medications, go through the protocol, and if the medications no longer seem to be working, go and talk to the psychiatrist, do a med review. And with a lot of our folks that come to see us for anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, that their medication ends up decreasing and they're able to move away from that. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was curious of how common is your practices right now? Or, I mean, like, Wendy was going to do stem cell injections for a problem in her back. And it wasn't covered by insurance because insurance feels that it's not there yet, or it's not tested, or, they want to do surgeries and different things like this, where like with Greg's group, how Greg is, they would rather not do surgery if at all possible.
Absolutely.
And so, if it's at all possible, and I wonder how much you're under attack to help these people out of the depression they're in, the anxieties that they're having through a natural way.
Mm-hmm.
This goes against the drug companies. I mean, they're the ones that don't like this, wait, you're taking away my patients here,
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, so let me ask it another way. If I were running into a situation like you were talking about with your brother and you,
Mm-hmm.
how many places are there around the country that do the things that y'all do right now?
Well, it's interesting. I've actually been looking at that recently, and there's over 400,000 neurofeedback practitioners worldwide. Wow. And in the States, there's over 200,000. And so when we look at this, it's really fascinating because there's so many studies. I mean, since the 1960s, if I remember correctly, there have been over 18,000 peer-reviewed journal articles on neurofeedback. There have been over 40,000 peer-reviewed journal articles that include EEG and QEEG, which is kind of the brain scan and the diagnostic side of the treatment. And that in all of that, it is still something that is really challenging to get some insurance reimbursement on. You can, for the most part, but there certainly is there is a bit of a challenge around some of that. But fortunately, when you look at it in terms of number of providers, there's so many opportunities to be able to engage in this type of therapy. And so it really is quite prevalent. There's a lot of folks around that are doing it. And just like in any other field, there are some folks that are really, really good at it, understand all of the science and how the brain works. Then there's the other folks that have been trained to just connect people to these machines, run them, and get decent results. And so it really also depends about vetting who you're working with. And that's a really, really important thing. And that's with all of the groups that I contract with and that I work with, and even in my own private practice, that it really is one of those things that if we can help somebody, we say we can help them. If we can't help them, it's not a, let's see, let's try it and see. It's a, no, this is likely not going to work. And it's about being honest, setting real expectations for what this treatment can do. And that it can be incredibly effective for a pretty large cross-section of individuals in what people are dealing with. It's pretty accessible, it's easy, and when you look at it in terms of a cost-benefit analysis of, let's say, doing neurofeedback versus medication, you're looking at a program of $6,000 to $12,000 for the neurofeedback. But if you look at the course of a lifetime of medication, you're at almost $96,000 for just your copay and medication over a lifetime. And so if you can back down on that medication, which is relatively common, and again, not being a psychiatrist, it needs to be evaluated by a licensed professional that's going to look at that. But if that's possible, then from a cost benefit perspective, it's fantastic. So all the way around, it's a pretty accessible therapeutic modality.
So if I had a child that I was running into a situation like you were talking about your brother, what would be my first step on finding a person like you? I mean, if the people that are listening tonight said, you know what, I know somebody that this might help. You know, we tried everything else. What do you have to lose here? How would they get in touch with you? I mean, what would be the first step?
Sure. So generally, there's practitioners in just about every state and in every city. And so if you Google just neurofeedback, biofeedback, checking that out, if you're wherever you are in the country, that's helpful. You can also, you're welcome to contact me, and I'm happy to vet for folks if there are individuals that are having trouble finding practitioners. I am happy to talk with them. And again, and like I said, there's some really good practitioners, some practitioners that I would recommend not going to see. And so, and I'd be honest with you about that. But there's a credentialing board called bcia.org, which is the primary credentialing board. And on there's a find a practitioner link, and you can put in a zip code and go ahead and find a practitioner through that as well. But if you're in and around the Tampa area, there's a number of really great practitioners that are working with Florida surgery consultants, and we'd be happy to talk with you as well over there, and our team of neurosurgeons as well as neuroscientists are top notch. And so we'd be happy to talk with you and kind of help you sort through some of the questions you might have.
Cameron, one of the questions that we have from one of our safety team people, John Lassner, he wants to know, like in your area, because it sounds like you have a private practice and maybe have worked with some other organizations. He's asking, have you ever worked with the police, any of the officers?
I have. My early on in my career, I got pretty frustrated with early on in my career. Neurofeedback was really cost prohibitive. The equipment was really expensive. It was hard to access. And so I started a nonprofit at that point called Synaptic Connections. And I worked with prisoners of war coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and I worked with a lot of military, and then that actually opened up to where I worked with a lot of police officers in Reston, Virginia, in Charleston, South Carolina, and also here in Asheville, and have done a lot of work. And it's interesting because police officers require a much different approach in a lot of ways, because unlike military, police officers are coming home, They get off their shift, they are dealing with all of the events of what just happened, and then they've got to go right back out into it. And as they are coming back in, and let's say that they're coming off shift, there's still this separation now more than ever, where most police officers aren't having their community rally around them or support them or really want to engage with them in a meaningful way. And so now police officers are back home, isolating, only being able to hang out with other folks that have experienced the exact same things that they've experienced. And so there's a different approach where there has to be a community that's fostered, where these folks can have an outlet, that these folks can come in, talk about all of the intensity of what's going on, and learn more about what's happening in their brain that drives into a lot of the fear response, a lot of the anger, the agitation, mood dysregulation, the frustration, the sadness, the feelings that other people just will not understand them, feelings of not being at home in their own home. That there's so many factors that come into play for police officers that it's very unique. And I had in working with the police officers, I get out of the way, that I can facilitate and foster kind of the group dynamics and all of that. But police officers need to support police officers, and people in the church need to support police officers by allowing them to have a space and time to process through and to engage with everything without labeling it, without naming that it's trauma, that it's PTSD, that it's this or that. It's quite frankly a lack of a larger community coming together and bolstering and supporting and giving these guys and women a space to speak freely and to actually express what's going on in their experience.
And that's kind of how, I mean, that's kind of a good lead in, and I didn't plant that question. I truly didn't, but that's kind of a good lead in because that was one of the things that got us together, was that Greg and I sat down one day, and we were kind of talking about how we could help mend this a lot of this stuff that's going on out here. What could we do? And I just told him while I was sitting there with him, because Greg doesn't have any police experience, and I just explained to him, I said, listen, we don't really have a place to go and talk. And I said, we don't have a place to vent, because when we're on the department, they had this employees assistance program that you ask to go see a counselor. You know, you have to go down their list of counselors and look for it, and then you go. And it's really not it's not as private as we'd like it to be, you know. And as soon as the department knows that you've gone to a psychiatrist a counselor of anything, there's a red flag on you now. And now they're watching you even closer. So I told Greg that we needed a place where police officers could come in. And of course, with my background in Christianity, I wanted to be in a church to where they can come in and we can sit with other officers and we can talk without having fear of it leaving the room. Now, of course, you know, if you have a guy that sits down and says, I'm thinking of killing myself, we got to do something. We got to take care of it right there. But that's where it became important to kind of, where do we go to the next step? Greg kind of has it going the other way, where they see you first and then the support team. But this is just this, you know, the specifics that we need to work out, you know, the roadmap that we're going to put this together. But I just found it fascinating when you said, one of the things that you said to just really hit home for me was that when military people when they come home, the battlefield has been left overseas or over there. Police officers come home, they take off their uniform, decompress by self-medication of some form or something like that, and then throw the uniform back on the next day, and they're back out there in it again, because they don't switch the areas that they work. So they're seeing the same thing happen over and over and over and over again. And how far do they go before they've had enough? They become cold. They become hard. They don't trust anybody. They don't trust their neighbors. They don't trust their wives. They don't trust anybody. And so I was joking, because I remember one time where I was going to a church and everybody was standing around going, so what did you do this weekend? And like this one woman, you know, said, you know, they went to the movies, and this other person said, hey, we went to this Italian restaurant and all that stuff. And they look at me and they go, Jim, what did you do? Well, I got in a fight with a guy and he ended up in the hospital, you know, and then they don't want to talk to you anymore, because it's like, You know, really? Oh, okay. Well, that just freaks me out. You know, Jim beats up on people. No, you weren't there. So, like I said, hearing that, I mean, this is the other reason why I'm really excited about this, you know, all the stuff that we've kind of got working in the background. But we would love to be able to work with officers and do something like, and I hate to use the term because I'm afraid people might get upset, but a celebrate recovery style, you know, organization that where police officers with the church can come together, speak freely, not have to worry about what's being said, just lay it all out there and see if we can help them cope with those things and let them know that they are not alone, but also that and not push religion down on them. That's the one thing we don't want to do.
No.
But we want to make it to where they do understand that there are other alternatives. Christ is one, you know, the stuff that you do is another, physical fitness, all these different things that we can do to help out those that are in pain. So,
and that's really going to lead into our next question from Jim Markowski. Do you not share that? And do you not share information that the PO state during interaction with police hierarchy? I can't say it, hierarchy.
No, absolutely not. That's all protected under HIPAA in the Health and Information Protection Act and all. And so we really, so everything that happens in this is really confidential, and it stays within the community. And really, as Jim was saying, that really this positive and a peer support community that is just facilitated by some of these church members, leaders, and for the safety team and therapists, whoever it is, that in this whole thing, that this is meant to be a completely safe, confidential, community-driven kind of approach. And with these other interventions that we do, the brain-based interventions to help support and bolster and kind of get things moving along, all of that is going to stay private, and that we will respect what individuals are even willing to share with other police officers or other people within the community. If we need to do one-on-one check-ins and consultations and conversations, and great. And oftentimes those sessions look more like going out to coffee and just having a conversation. It's not coming and sitting on somebody's couch and having this like, well, let me analyze your dreams. That's great and all, has its place, but that's not what's needed here. That it's genuine interaction, being seen, appreciated, valued, and that requires confidentiality.
Well, and this is the perfect timing for this conversation because the Department of Homeland Security also has come out and asked for the churches to be a bridge between community and local law enforcement. So this is all perfect timing. It's all God's timing.
It really is, isn't it? Yeah.
So before we go, I want to know what conflict diffusion and versus resolution and trauma-informed pastoral counseling is. Just a little snippet. So if somebody asks me what that means, I can answer them intelligently. So
absolutely. Well, so really, oftentimes when we are trying to work with individuals, or if we have individuals in a church that have dealt with a lot of trauma, a lot of stress, don't fit the mold of the rest of the congregation, or we are dealing with folks that have just experienced a whole lot more life experience than other individuals, oftentimes we're trying to diffuse it. We're trying to calm it down. We're trying to contain everything that's going on. And the trouble is that when we try to contain a lot of excessive emotion and a lot of really suppressed trauma, and I say trauma loosely, that it's essentially that too much stimuli coming in constantly and the brain just hasn't had a chance to process it all. And so seeking resolution comes from having authentic relationships and meaningful relationships, and showing up with the love of Christ in those people's lives, to hear them, see them, and authentically live in vulnerability with one another. And through that, we resolve internal conflict. And that's really the crux of all, from our own desire to kind of fix others, correct things for others, rescue others from their emotions, and shifting over into having authentic bonding, connection, relationships, having that oxytocin, that's that love and bonding and connection, that is what actually rebalances the brain, the body, brings us into health, gives us clearer perspective, and then we can engage more meaningfully in whatever our spiritual practice and spiritual life is, in our interpersonal relationships. So that's the crux of it, without going too far into it all.
If you write that in a simple format for me, I can take that around the country. I can tell you right now, that is something that is needed. I love the way that you put it, because I facilitate a men's group, and we've been doing this now for probably 8 years. And the trust that we have in that group, you know, is just, it's close to what I felt when I was on the police department with my brothers-in-law. Okay. But yet it was a dysfunctional family with the police department, you know.
Absolutely. A lot of trauma bond.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and like a person would get in trouble and would get suspended for drinking too much, and they get back to the job and go, "Hey, how you doing? I'm doing fine. Okay, let's go have a beer." You know, I mean, that's just the way it was. There wasn't, you know, you didn't look at the guy and say, "Okay, well, let's find an alternative for this. You know, let's do something different." And so I'm really excited, because you just gave me that 30-second commercial of that. That is really exactly what we need to be doing. And that is that bond, that Christ-like bond. And until we can really, truly start to get that, we're just going to continue to flounder in this chaos that we're in right now. So it's something that we just continuously have to work toward and be the shining light, you know, but also in our business, we have to make sure that we protect everybody, you know, protect the flock and the person that is, you know, that is the one that's causing us the trouble. So yeah,
absolutely.
I'm really excited. Anybody else there, babe? Any other questions?
I do not have any other questions.
So before we go, what could we do for you? What could this group do for you? What is it that you would like to have us do if somebody were to say, "Hey, I heard Cameron talk last night. What could we do?"
Well, I think that, you know, there's a few different avenues that kind of come to mind in that I think that if you've got individuals that are working with folks that are just not quite sure what to do, you know, they're complex and all of that definitely reach out and talk with us about those individuals. If you've got folks that are struggling and that they're having difficulties with, you know, interpersonal, with mood regulation, with all, whether they've had the trauma or whatever, or they've had head injuries, or whatever they're dealing with, that definitely let us know if we can help serve them, if we can help them out in that process. And I think one of the biggest things that we can just continue to do is, as questions and concerns come up, keep a conversation and a dialogue going. I want to support y'all in your mission. And if that includes being able to offer some of these services and help with the brain-based side of it and regulating the neurochemistry, fantastic. If it's sitting down and having coffee and talking about how groups are going or how to set that up, I want to be there to help support in some of that as well. So really, I think supporting one another is really, really important. And so it's a two-way street. If there's anything y'all need, I'm here. And really, if there's any way I can support y'all or any of the folks you're working with, I'm happy to have a conversation with them and figure out what we can do.
Now, I just wanted to clarify something, because we've said this word over and over and over again. When we talk about trauma, trauma could be physical, mental, could be
Chemical.
anything that happens in life.
Right.
I had a really good friend that one of his daughters became anorexic. And there's got to be something that's, you know, off there. And I'm not trying to say it the wrong way, but something that happened that caused her to do that, which I think that in something that you're doing might have been a help. I mean, I do know that she went to a place in North Carolina, I really, where it was a lot of what you're talking about of the, you know, neuropsychological, that they worked with her on it. And so these are, it's any type of trauma that we're talking about, which is a whole, you know, it's not like just head trauma or something like that. I explained to you about my trauma in my life, and you picked up on it right away and just started saying things. And I was like, wow. So I felt like I needed to write you a check for that session. You know, it went really well. But like I said, we have your information. You're going to be at the conference. This is something that we're really excited about having you speak. There'll be times when you'll be there for the day, correct? And because we have a panel at the end that we ask all the speakers to talk at, but I know that there'll be people that want to ask you a lot of questions. So I'm really excited about having you come down, even though I know it's hard to leave Asheville during this time.
It is. I'm really looking forward to being down there.
Waynesville. But I, like I said, I love that area up there. So, Wendy, are there any more questions?
There are not.
Okay, well, I'm going to do some housekeeping, some of the stuff that we need to do. If y'all have any questions, you can contact me and I will get them to Cameron. And of course, he's going to be at our conference. And so please, I'm going to talk about the conference here in a second, but we really want you to come out to it, because we're going to be talking a lot about mental health. We're going to be talking about human trafficking. We're going to be talking about the whole gamut, and even things that are going on in this country you might not be aware of. So Cameron, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll give you a call in a little bit, and then we'll see where we're going to go from here. So
that sounds great. It's great to be on. I really appreciate it, and appreciate the time. Look forward to seeing you.
We'll talk real soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
Take care. Okay. So, all right. Here's some of the stuff that we do. This is free. This is something you can come out, and especially if you come out on Sunday night and we're talking at the Facebook Live, these are things that we talk about. We talk about Cameron coming on, the special guests that we have, and we're going to have more and more of the speakers that are going to be talking at the conference come on live and go through some of the stuff that they'll be talking about at the conference. They're not going to tell you everything. You got to come to see it. So Facebook Live, 8 o'clock on Sunday nights. Come in and just be out there with me, support, and it's free. We talk about just everything that's happening. We have plenty of resources out there. We also have our YouTube. We will have this out on YouTube for a while, and then we're going to move it to our paid site. This just helps support the ministry. And you become a member, you get access to our paid site, and also you get a free ticket to the conference. So there's a whole lot of things out here that we try to do that are free. God Logic Project, Kevin was on last week, and he has our interview and other interviews that I've done with him out there that you can go out, like his page, follow him. It helps him out in the long run. Like I said, Kevin and the God Logic Project. We have our free resources out there, putting together a safety plan, developing a safety team, carrying weapons in a church, and Sunday morning what to look for. These are free. We just had a call from a church up in Norfolk, Virginia. We're going to be heading up there. They didn't know anything about us. They saw the free resources, pulled it down, and they've already started to put their safety team together, but they want us to come in and help them with some of the training. Okay, this is October the 17th, 2020, from 7:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. It's a jam-packed day. We're going to have speakers all day long. You can see the list of speakers that we have here. Cameron is going to be one of them. Every one of these people that are on this board, we have had an opportunity to talk to. And I can tell you right now, it's going to be jam-packed with great information. And for $40, folks, for $40 right now, where can you go and have this many people talk to you about important things about protecting your church and watching out for those things that can harm your church? For $40, you get breakfast, you get snacks, and you get lunch. How could you go wrong? So we hope to see you on October the 17th. Let's pack the church in reference to making sure that our churches are safe. Ways to support us: prayer, membership, churches, $125 a month, or $100 if you pay it off all at once, $100 a month, $1,200. But that gives you training, that we come in and actually do training for you, and some word of mouth assessments and walkthroughs, and plus calls to us about anything that's going on. We also, like I said, have our online membership, which is, we're still offering it at $20 right now. We have not moved it up to $25, but weekly online training, you'll have access to it in our training library. And plus you get one ticket to the safety conference. We also do training and also donations. We're trying to get out here. We're trying really hard to get out here and be able to work with those churches that can't afford to have this type of training so that they can protect the flock, because it does not matter the size of the church. We've seen that from 100 or less member church to large churches, we're all under attack. We're seeing it more and more and more. USCCA, I cannot stress this enough. It's for your protection. If you carry a concealed weapon, you should have some sort of protection where people are going to help you in case you get into a situation. And we're going to have Ricky from USCCA. I'm going to reach out to him, see if I can't have him on one of the webinars, because he has got incredible information, and he's going to be telling you things that I have been telling you a long time. And it's just going to reinforce what I've been trying to say, how we should be protecting the church, because there's a lot of churches out here that do it the wrong way. And we've talked about it over and over and over again. But if you get yourself into a situation, these are the people that are going to protect you. I was talking to Ricky, and he said, even if you shove somebody because it's using self-defense to protect you or your family during these trying times, they will help you out on this. I found that very interesting. Are there any other questions, dear?
I do not see any.
Okay, we're going to close up. We thank you so much for your time. We thank you so much for coming out here and supporting us. Please, please, please be safe out there. Be blessed. God bless this country. I pray for y'all all the time. I want you to know that, because you are doing such a worthwhile job of making sure that we're protecting the flock as we go through these changing times in our country. We have to be prepared. We have to be ready. There's going to be so much going on here in the next few years that it's just that we just have to be ready. It's another topic for another day, but we need to be ready. God bless you. God bless this country, and we'll talk soon.